The Bible reading tonight will be from Luke chapter 9, and we'll be reading from verses 18 to 27. Once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "The Christ of God." Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone, and he said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." Then he said to them all, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. What good is it for man to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit his very self? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God." Here ends the reading.
Well, thanks again for having me here tonight. It's a real joy for me to be back here tonight. There's a lot of faces I recognise, and there's a lot of new faces too, which is really great. It feels like it's just sort of gone up a notch since I was here, so it's really nice to be here. When like I was saying, when I first became a Christian, it was later in life. I was about 21, I think. And for me, it was this profound change to begin this new relationship with God. I was kind of on this natural high, I think, for the longest time. I'd come out of a little bit of a druggy kind of background, but this was a natural high, and it was super good. And I just remember like this honeymoon period. It just felt, it was great. And so when I would tell people what had happened to me, I would emphasize this joy that I'd found, how great it was to be following the Lord, to begin this relationship with God. And this is what it meant to follow Jesus. I would tell people, it just like you'd have this amazing joy. It was this amazing experience. That was kind of like my sales pitch. But of course, that feeling, it didn't stay like that. It didn't last like that. And but in my mind, I thought, well, that's what I thought it was all about, And so when I talked to people, I would find myself still emphasizing this idea of how, it's really great. You have this great joy when you're following the Lord. That's what I kept saying to people. But at the same time, I started to feel a little bit fake because, that feeling wasn't there so much. And in hindsight, I think I came to realize not only did I have a misunderstanding of what true joy is, but I had a misunderstanding of what following Jesus was really meant to be like, what it meant to identify with Jesus. And I think, like me, a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what following Jesus is all about. They expect something else. And maybe if you've been a Christian for a little while, it might be that you've expected it to be like something else, and it's just often jarring with you because you're not expecting it to be like this. And so I think Luke writes this passage to correct some of these misunderstandings that we have about following Jesus. Luke wants his readers to understand what following Jesus is all about. He wants people to have the correct expectations. But at the same time, he wants people to get on board with it. And so this passage, it answers three questions for us, I think. First of all, what does it mean to follow Jesus? Why should you follow Jesus? And how can you follow Jesus? What does it mean to follow Jesus? Why should you follow Jesus? And how can you follow Jesus? So first of all, what does it really mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to follow Jesus? Because people, they often have the wrong idea. They expect something different. And this comes out at the beginning of the passage. Jesus, he's in private with his disciples. He's praying. The disciples are nearby. And he says to his disciples, who do people think I am? What are they saying about me? They've seen all the things I've been doing, the things we've been looking at the last few weeks. They've seen my power. What are they saying about me? And the disciples are a bit like, well, some are saying you must be John the Baptist. Others, they're like, you must be Elijah. Still others are saying that you must be one of the prophets from long ago. Incidentally, it's pretty rare, isn't it? If you sort of, when you do these kind of surveys at uni, you're wondering who people think, geez, it's very rare for someone to say, I think you might be John the Baptist. It doesn't often happen, does it? But this is what people were saying. And the point is, they could see that there was something special about Jesus, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. And so Jesus says to his disciples, well, what about you? Who do you say I am? And Peter, he sort of speaks on behalf of them, and he says, well, we think you're the Christ or the Messiah. You're the one we've been waiting for, the one who's been promised from ages past. So they get it, right? They get it. But then Jesus says the strangest thing. It says he urgently warned them not to tell anybody this. And you kind of think, wait, what? Why? Isn't this what Jesus has been trying to let people know with all the miracles and things he's been doing? Why doesn't he want people to know who he is? And I think the answer is because, you see, people had the wrong idea about the Messiah. The Jews, they were thinking he's going to come, he's going to put things right, he's going to judge all their enemies, which means overthrowing the Romans. It would be all glory, it would be all peace, it would be joy from then on in. But Jesus is saying it's not going to be like that. At least not yet. First of all, Jesus says, verse 22, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple, whoever wants to come after me, must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. In other words, if you're going to follow me, if you're going to identify with me, it's not going to be all rainbows and sunshine like you might think it is. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? What's he saying? What does it mean to follow Jesus? I think the answer is it means being willing to be hated and even killed every day, accepting a kind of rejection and death. Now that kind of, it sounds a little bit over the top, doesn't it? But isn't that what Jesus is really saying here? To willingly take up your cross. Think about that. Think about the picture Jesus leaves. To willingly take up your cross. It's a metaphor, not just that you're prepared to suffer some of life's difficulties, but it's a picture of someone who is willing to be mocked and hated by the crowds. A society reject. Someone willing to suffer and even die, even though it might not be right or fair. And Jesus is saying, if you want to follow me, then that's what you have to be willing to accept every day, because that's the path I'm on. Resurrection only comes after suffering and death. Remember Peter when Jesus was arrested? When Jesus was arrested, all the disciples, they scatter. But Peter, he kind of follows from a distance, just watching, waiting to see what's going to happen. And while he's there, someone says, hey, I think this guy was with them too. And Peter's like, no, I wasn't one of them. It wasn't me. I wasn't there. And he's again a couple more times after that. They say, hey, weren't you one of the disciples as well? Weren't you with Jesus? And a couple more times Peter denies that he even knows Jesus. See, Peter is a picture of someone at that point who wasn't prepared to really follow Jesus, to come after Jesus. He wasn't willing to face the hatred and the possible death that went with that. But that's what following Jesus is all about. That's what Jesus is saying you should expect if you want to identify with Jesus. Some of you might know Nate and Jenny Schoen, missionaries to the Yale people in East Africa. We've prayed for them at our church at different times in the past, and they've come and visited us. In their latest letter, I get their letters, in their latest letter they asked people to pray for a guy called Stephen, who's a believer over there, and he recently lost everything in order to follow Christ. He was kicked out of his father's home. All his belongings were sold. He was forced to be removed from his school. But for Stephen, it was worth it. It was worth it. He was willing to suffer that for the sake of following Jesus. And that's what it means to follow Jesus. Now, I know what you're thinking. You might be thinking, yeah, but, it's not like that in Australia. I mean, you're not going to die for being a Christian in Australia, are you? And, that's true. You are very unlikely to be killed for being a Christian in Australia. And I don't think this passage is kind of encouraging us to have some sort of persecution complex where we're kind of just sort of walking around and, it's just so hard being a Christian. Everybody's against us as a Christian. Poor old me. I don't think we're meant to have that kind of attitude either. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that Christianity's reputation is getting worse in Australia. Now, sometimes I think Christians bring that on themselves. Some Christians act in self-righteous ways, and some Christians say clumsy things. But you know what? You can be a really loving, kind, gracious Christian. Your best friend can be gay. And your gay friend, they know that you love them. They know that you care for them. You're really good friends with them. But because other people might hear you say that you don't agree with acting on same-sex attraction, everybody else just automatically assumes you must be the most hateful, bigoted person there is. You can lose your job for what you believe in that area. See, it used to be, I think, that people thought Christians were just a bit weird. But now I think Christians are starting to be seen as morally bad. And the Bible is seen to be a little bit dangerous and awful in parts. Just look at how I think Christianity is being portrayed in popular culture. I was reading an article recently that mentions two really popular TV shows, The Game of Thrones and The Handmaid's Tale. Now, I don't watch The Game of Thrones, but in it there's a very unpleasant character called the High Sparrow. And the High Sparrow in the show, he's dressed like a monk, and he's surrounded by women who are dressed like nuns. And he leads this religious order that supposedly cares for the poor, but he's this kind of revolting hypocrite. He's coercive, he's abusive. He delights to manipulate power using this kind of religious language, and he loves to humiliate women. There's a bit of a perception of Christianity out there like that, I think. That's one perception that is out there. In The Handmaid's Tale, which I do watch, I saw season 1, it's said at the time in the future, if you haven't seen it, there's this terrible civil war in the United States and society breaks down. And after the dust settles, these fundamentalist Christians take over government. And because the population is shrinking and the birth rate is plummeting, women become these kind of possessions of men. They become like baby factories, ready to be abused and humiliated. And the portrayal of Christianity, I think, is this. It is a religion that abuses power, hates women, endorses sexual violence, and manipulates people. That's out there in popular culture, that kind of perception. So, you probably won't be killed in Australia for being a Christian. But taking up your cross often starts with taking on a bad reputation, being hated and despised by the crowds. And Jesus is saying, if you want to follow me, you have to be willing for that. And you have to be willing to go even further if it should come to that. I remember I started working in this job in the back docks of Target. I was just unloading trucks, and I was a new Christian at the time. One night I was out socialising with my work friends, and we were kind of sitting around and in a kind of little circle, and my boss from the other side of the circle kind of called out to me. He said, "Hey Simon, how come you couldn't come to work on Saturday?" And I'd been at some church activity at the time, but all of a sudden everything stopped, and I could see everyone stopped in a little conversation. They all looked at me like I was on stage, and I just froze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say I was at some church activity because I didn't know what people would think of me, and so I just kind of didn't say anything. And then for some strange reason, people just turned back to the conversations and we went on. And that's how I thought, I've just been tested and I really failed. You see, I wasn't willing to follow Jesus at that point. I wasn't willing to identify with Jesus. Now, people weren't going to hate me or kill me. They might have looked at me a little bit funny, but I wasn't even willing for that. I guess if you're willing, if you're ready, if you're prepared for the worst, then you're probably prepared for anything. Now for you, it might be, when you're in a tutorial at uni, and you're the only Christian there and something comes up and you can feel it, can't you? Or, when you're with particular friends, or maybe at a work situation, or when you get together with some family members maybe, or maybe on Facebook. Are you willing to be hated and mocked and suffer and even killed if it came to that because you're with Jesus? I asked one of my kids the other week, I said to them, do you love Jesus? And they said, yes. And I said, well, if you were at school and all your friends weren't going to like you anymore, would you still side with Jesus? And they hesitated that. That was a difficult question to answer. And I thought, and it wasn't very fair because it put me in that kind of situation. I think I'd find that a hard question to answer too. What stops us? What's stopping us from being willing to take up our cross? What's going on in our hearts? Why won't we be ready to be hated and even killed? What do we want? What are we wanting more than we want Jesus? Well, we want to be safe, for one thing, I think. We want to be comfortable. We want life to be easy, like everybody else, it seems. We want to be liked. We want to be accepted. We want people's approval. Maybe we want to be popular. We're afraid of being disliked. We're afraid of being rejected. We're afraid of things being difficult. We don't want to miss out. And Jesus knows that. He knows that. And that's why he says, if you're going to follow me, you have to deny yourself. We have to deny ourselves. We have to let those things go. We have to give them up. We have to be happy to miss out. That's what it means to deny ourselves and take up our cross. See, imagine Peter, a different scenario. Imagine Peter, instead, when someone says, hey, weren't you with him? Aren't you someone who knows Jesus? Imagine Peter, head bowed, ready for the worst. Yes, I'm with him. I'm one of them. We're meant to be, I think, willing to identify with Jesus like that, instead of denying it. And when they do come down on us, I don't think we're meant to fight back. We're not meant to be going, hey, this is unfair. How dare you treat me like this? We're not really meant to be doing that either. Now, Peter made both those mistakes. Not only did he deny Jesus because he didn't want to suffer, but he wanted to fight back. Remember when they came for Jesus in the garden? The soldiers came. Peter's the one who pulls out the sword and cuts off the guy's ear. And Jesus is like, no, and he heals him. That's not how we're meant to do it. That's not what I'm doing here. That's not the path I'm on. Following Jesus, I think, almost means being happy to be hated, happy to suffer, happy to be killed for him, not whinging or complaining, not fighting back. So if that's what it means to follow Jesus, if that's what it means to really follow Jesus, if that's what Jesus is saying, why would you follow him in the first place? Why would you follow him in the first place? And that's the second question I think the passage wants to answer. Why should you follow Jesus if that's what it means to follow Jesus? And the answer is, I think, because the alternative to following Jesus is not worth it. It's not worth it. See, the alternative to following Jesus is trying to save your own life. Instead of following Jesus and possibly suffering and facing death, you try to save your life. So we don't let people know we're Christian in case they have a go at us. And if they do have a go at us, we're quick to defend ourselves, we're quick to fight back. We want to demand the right to free speech, right? See, we believe instead of following Jesus, it's worth trying to save our life because it's worth trying to save our life, right? But Jesus says, verse 24, whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it. See, the alternative is not worth it. It's not worth trying to save your life because that's how you lose it. If you want to save your life, you've actually got to let it go. It feels like it's been months this episode's been in the news. You may know Israel Folau, a star rugby union Waratah Wallaby player, and his tweet a few while ago, that gay people will go to hell if they don't repent. And now, upon reflection, maybe that was a kind of a clumsy way of saying it. It invited a lot of misunderstanding, I think. And he did try to clarify things, I think, in a follow-up article, which I thought was pretty good. He wasn't, what people were perceiving him to be like. And it brought up the whole issue of free speech and what it means and how you can express yourself. And yes, they need to work out what free speech means because, yes, I think, free speech is an important part of our society. But if you're one of the many Christians out there online making comments, kind of demanding this right to free speech, well, I think you may need to kind of check yourself. Are you simply trying to save your life? Or are you prepared to lose it? You should follow Jesus even if it means losing your life because that's how you save it. The alternative is not worth it. It's not worth trying to save your life because that's how you lose it. Another alternative to following Jesus is trying to gain the world. Instead of following Jesus, we try to gain the world. And we believe it's worth trying to gain the world. We just want to be loved. We want to be adored. We want to be popular. We want to be famous. We believe that will really satisfy us. That will make me someone. That will give me the significance that I crave. And I don't want to miss out on that. I had a friend at school, Matthew, and he only ever said this once, but I remember him saying it. It just stuck in my mind forever. He said, you know what, Simon, I don't care about anything else at the end of it. When I'm gone, the only thing I care about is I just want to be remembered. And it's the same thing, I think. We look for our significance and our worth in how other people see us. That's what we live for, to make a difference, to be the star, to receive the applause, to bring glory to ourselves. We try to gain the world in that sense. But listen to what Jesus says in verse 25. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet lose or forfeit their very self? See, even if you gain the whole world, what's it worth in the end? Nothing. If you gain the whole world, what are you left with in the end? Nothing. Nothing. You should follow Jesus even if it means missing out. Because the alternative, I tell you, is really just not worth it. It's not worth trying to gain the world instead. Now, another alternative, I think, to following Jesus is actually to be ashamed of what he teaches, who he is and what he teaches. Instead of following Jesus, you're ashamed of Jesus and what he teaches. So we hide the fact that we're a Christian. We keep it quiet. We don't want to be socially excluded. We want to be included. I think this is a little bit like me when I'm at parties or wedding receptions or sort of social gatherings. I'll talk about lots of stuff with people, but I sometimes find myself trying to steer the conversation away from my faith. I don't lie about it if it comes up. If it comes up, I don't lie about it. But I don't necessarily go there sometimes, I think. Sometimes when I'm online, I find I can be right up front. I'm fine with that. But, at social gatherings, they're meant to be fun. They're meant to be happy. You don't want to be the one to sort of spoil that or make it awkward. You don't want to be excluded. But I have to check myself, is it because I'm a little bit ashamed of Jesus and what he teaches? Or if you're one of those people who kind of picks and chooses what Jesus teaches, you just take all the stuff that everybody loves about Jesus, his love, his compassion, his care for the poor, his inclusion, and you promote that. This is what I'm about, everybody. How good is it? But you leave out all the other stuff that society sees as outdated and wrong. If I do that, is it because I'm a little bit ashamed of Jesus and his teaching? Because this is what Jesus says in verse 26. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in the glory of his Father and of his holy angels. You should follow Jesus even if it means being socially excluded, because the alternative is just not worth it. It's not worth being ashamed of Jesus and what he teaches. Okay, so we've seen what it means to follow Jesus, and it looks pretty daunting in one sense, but we've seen why you still should follow Jesus, because the alternative is just not worth it. But the final question is this: how can we do that then? How can we bring ourselves to want to follow him with full hearts, with hearts full of desire? What will enable you to follow Jesus when at times it seems like it could be quite unpleasant? Now, I know I fail at it pretty badly, so what will give you this inner desire to want to deny yourself, to be happy, to miss out for him? What will make you happily just take up your cross and be hated and ridiculed and suffer and even die for him? What will give you the ability to do that? How can you do that? And the answer is by seeing how he did that for you. See, even back here, Jesus knows what's coming. He knows the details of it, and he spells it out. The suffering, the rejection, the death. I'm someone who I find needles really hard to take, and if I know I've got to take a needle at some point, I get really anxious leading up to having a needle. For others, it might be some sort of operation you've got to have, or maybe you have to face a bully at work. Or maybe you're going somewhere and you're going to be embarrassed or humiliated, or you haven't got something done on time and you're going to be found out, or maybe you have to give a public speech somewhere. Even those kind of things, they make us squirm uncomfortably. We don't even want to face those kind of things, let alone what it means to take up your cross. We want to find some way out of this. Imagine being a prisoner on death row and you're scheduled to be executed tomorrow. What goes through your mind? Imagine that. What do you think about for the next few hours? How do you react? What do you do? Well, for Jesus, it's more than just the physical pain or suffering. It's more than the humiliation and rejection by the crowds. It's the suffering that comes from his Father turning his face away from him. It's enough to make his sweat like drops of blood in the garden. The pressure, the distress, the agony. It's the ultimate rejection. It's the ultimate suffering. And yet, he doesn't squirm. He doesn't try and get out of it. He doesn't try and find another way. He doesn't deserve what's going to happen to him, but he doesn't complain. He doesn't cry, this is unfair, what about me? He doesn't try and win the crowds over when they begin to reject him. He doesn't back down. He goes willingly. He's happy to deny himself, to miss out on everything in this life. He's glad to take up his cross, to be hated, to be mocked, to be humiliated and killed. Why? What drives him? Love for his Father? Yes, absolutely. But what else? What's driving him? I mean, we don't deserve this. If this is what it means, if this is what has to happen to save us, then we must be pretty bad. We must be worse than we dared believe. So why does he do it? I think the answer is because you are more loved than you dared imagine. You are so loved that he was glad to do this for you. And when you start to see how he took up his cross for you, to save you, to make you his, won't you take up your cross for his sake? Let me pray. Lord Jesus, there is no one like you. There is no one else who deserves our allegiance, our affection, our love, our hearts. May we see clearly what you did for us, what it cost you, and how much you love us, so that we might be moved from within, out of love, to live and even die for you. Amen.